we go. So if you look behind me, you'll see my house panther, Maggie, who normally doesn't like being held. She can be okay with it sometimes. Look over there. Yeah, I know. That's right. You're famous now. She snuck into the recording room, or what I'm using as my recording room, and I thought you might want to see her. Oh, she's trying to escape. Give me a second. Go, get out. You can't. I gotta choose. Okay. Welcome back to Bioethics. Thanks for bearing with me for no lecture on Tuesday. I'm sure you're like super distressed at not getting it, but I've been feeling awful for the past few days, so I'm mostly okay now. But yeah, some digestive issues. Anyway, so we need to talk about our topic of the day because that's really all I have. There's no like housekeeping stuff that I think I need to take care of. It's just spurring some thoughts on euthanasia. So you've read the text, and the text make some conceptual distinctions that are really important, like the difference between active and passive euthanasia, which you should understand by now. Active being what it sounds like, actively killing somebody or somebody actively killing themselves, and passive being the allowing somebody to die by not intervening and continuing their life. So taking someone off life support is an instance of passive euthanasia because you're not acting to kill them, you're not actively killing them or interrupting their bodily functions, you're simply ceasing to sustain their bodily functions in an artificial way. Whereas giving somebody some sort of shot in the arm that'll stop their heart would be active euthanasia because you're acting to intervene on their body's natural functioning to stop it. So philosophers tend to make a lot of the distinction between active and passive euthanasia when it comes to the question of the morality of it. But really the more interesting and much more like practically important questions are the practical ones about like how we would actually allow this or what sort of policies we would have about euthanasia. Like a lot of people are pro-euthanasia or at least are for the option of being able to legally exist. But if you are going to create an option like that or as a service that's available to the public, you have to have all of your questions answered about exactly how and who and when and where and things like that. If you don't have those policies, those questions answered, it's just a nightmare. It's a mess, and they're going to be nightmarishly bad cases of people who shouldn't be given given euthanasia. People who should be killed do get killed, or people who should have access to it can't, and we don't want that. So let's talk about some of the important practical questions. Most people, like I said, are for euthanasia or for the availability of it to certain people. The people who aren't for it, people who are against the availability of euthanasia as a legal means of ending your life, usually have one argument. And that argument is that if you make it available, it's going to be misused. It's sort of the same argument a lot of people make for the death penalty, is that if you do it, you're inevitably going to execute innocent people, and that's just too big a price to pay for the good of having a death penalty. That argument makes some sense to me, and I understand the argument when it applies to euthanasia. I'm sure you could too, because you can imagine all sorts of nightmare scenarios, or maybe not straightforwardly nightmarish ones, but ones that are so complicated or icky that you just don't want it. Like one scenario that's often presented is a scenario in which the family is inappropriately pressuring a person to be euthanized, say for financial interests or something that the family has in their death. And the supposition is that a lot of people who aren't in great health, who love their family, could be convinced to go that route when there might be a better route. Might be a chance of them recovering or at least living a reasonably good life for much longer, but that their family could convince them otherwise. So that is the bones of the anti-euthanasia argument, is people would make the wrong decision, or people would be pressured into decisions that they shouldn't be pressured into. If that seems true to you, and it seems almost inevitable to me that if you're making this widely available and you do it long enough, eventually some sort of nasty case like that is going to arise and get through. If that fact for you is so horrific that it outweighs any good that might be done by making euthanasia available to the public for the entire future, then the discussion is over. The only thing that's left for you to do is to explain why that terrible case, or the possibility of those cases, can't be mitigated, can't be lessened or guarded against, and why their possibility is so horrific that it can't stand up to the good that's done by making euthanasia available. And there's a lot of good that could be done from it. I mean, a lot of people are in immense suffering at the end of their life and spend years that way and can't get much of any of the good things out of life that life has to offer because they're in constant suffering. And you can't really enjoy time with your grandkids if you have a migraine constantly, or pain the equivalent of a migraine constantly, or if if your gastrointestinal tract is so demolished that you're constantly hooked up to machines and bags and things, you can't go out into see a movie with your friends or whatever. So a lot of the good things that we think makes life worth living aren't available to a lot of people who are really sick, but they're caught in this this unfortunate limbo space between being so sick or in so much pain that they can't enjoy life, they can't really benefit from being alive. But we have technology capable of keeping them alive in that state. Or the person just happens to be stuck in that state with some horrific condition that's not killing them, but that's making life pretty useless to have. So when we weigh the good versus the bad, a lot of people who are on the everybody who's on the pro-euthanasia side thinks that the good that can be done by making this available to everybody is immense, and that the bad, the harms, dangers of making it available can be guarded against by good policies. And they take the worries very seriously, just like people on the anti-euthanasia side, but they're more optimistic about our ability to guard against it, to have questions and standards in place that allow us to make sure when we participate in the ending of a person's life, we're doing the right thing. Because that's what you're doing, is you're helping somebody kill themselves. Not you, maybe, but if you work in a hospital that offers this, or if you're part of a society that offers this, then you in some sense are, there's some measure of complicity, or at least if you support it, you do. So I want to dig into some of those practical problems, because it's not very interesting to just say, well, if you're against it, there are no practical problems. And it seems like in a lot of states and countries, that the practical problems aren't just theoretical, but are going to become practical because some places are making this available. There are places in Canada has recently made euthanasia more widely available through the passing of a piece of legislation in Ottawa. So what are the practical problems? They're mostly fairly simple, at least to begin with. For one, how do you actually do it? What method should we use to make death available to people who want it? Despite what Hollywood movies make it seem, there's really not a lot of stuff out there that you can just like take a pill of and it will kill you. The very few things that there are, there's almost nothing in nature like this, with the exception of like extremely radioactive elements or venoms from animals. So with those exceptions, the few things that are available to us that you can just put in your mouth or inject in your veins and it will definitely kill you, most of those things were made by the Soviets during the Cold War, and they kill you in extremely unpleasant ways. You've probably seen in the news in the last year a story about a chemical called Novichok that was manufactured during the Cold War by the USSR, and that's recently been used almost certainly by the Russians to assassinate people who were former enemies of the Soviet state, the people who defected or who spied against their own country, now in their old age are being killed by this chemical that if you just touch it, it kills you basically. But it kills you in extremely painful and not particularly quick ways. So one standard that's pretty consistently agreed on by everybody is that if we make this available, it has to be humane. It has to be something that isn't grotesque or morbid or violently painful. Just intuitively, that seems like the right thing to do. We can't just, set people on fire or something. Like you have to, there has to be a right and dignified way of doing it. And on the one hand, pain is a consideration, but on the other hand, just the dignity of the process is really important. If a chemical that we give you kills your brain instantly, but then sends your body into violent seizures and has you foam at the mouth and defecate yourself and things, it's just for the people on the other side of the procedure, it would be so horrific that we couldn't sanction it. Maybe because we think that it makes death undignified in that case, or maybe because we think that the harm done to the other people involved would be too great, or because we think there's just got to be something better than that. So some methods that have been proposed involve asphyxiating on a chemical that you would breathe in and that would kill you, but not in a terrible or painful way. Nitrogen is one option that's been put forward. If you breathe in pure nitrogen for 5 or 10 minutes, you sort of go into a state where you are completely numb, but you feel content, at peace. You don't have, you literally lose your will to do anything at all, to move your body. So if you put on a nitrogen mask and hooked it up to a tank and you had the nozzle right there that you were controlling, you could get to the state where you would be conscious, and even though you, some level in your mind, don't want to die, you couldn't muster the will to actually turn the nozzle off. And people who've been in that state report being totally at peace. That's one option. Some people have suggested just injecting gigantic dose of opioids into a patient and let them die from an opiate overdose. Those can be um, ineffective in some cases. There are certain people who can just live through heroin overdoses, which it would essentially be heroin. So you don't want to fail, but heroin overdoses can also do things like make you foam at the mouth, your eyes roll back in your head and things, or you go into a seizure or something. So that's off the table for most people. So coming up with a humane method of actually administering euthanasia is one practical problem. But let's say we solve that. I mean, it seems definitely solvable. It's the reason that it hasn't before is because there just hasn't been much demand for an industry that produces things that kill you, apart from guns. And I've never heard anybody suggest that like we should do a firing squad or something. It's too violent and painful and just awful. A more interesting practical question to me, and one that I would like to hear more of your thoughts on, is how do you actually do the procedure? Like, what do you do? Say that you're you're nearing the end of your life, and you want to end things because you've got terminal cancer that's only going to get worse and more painful, and you've got maybe a month to live, and you're not in terrible pain right now because you're on drugs, but as the pain increases, the doses are going to have to go up, and that's going to put you into this fog where you can't really interact with anybody anymore, and you've decided that at this point you're mentally present, you can interact with your friends and family, you could say goodbye to them in a dignified way, and you could end things before it becomes just a really ugly and boring, painful fog of an end to your life. So you've decided you want to do it. What do you do? There have been a few cases where people have let journalists cover the last days of their life, and one thing that consistently people choose to do is to have like a goodbye party that's a celebration to your life. It's sort of the thing that most people say they want their funeral to be, but they're actually there and present for it. Their friends and family come and celebrate the life that the person has led and tell them that they love them and assure them that they're leaving the world a person who was loved and appreciated. And then the person leaves. So let's pause there and let me ask, would it be possible for you to do that at a ceremony with somebody without it being, I mean, could it really be a celebration? Could it really be joyous? Could it really be anything other than totally heartbreaking? If you say no, if you say it would just be a really heartbreaking experience, that doesn't mean that it's so bad that we can't have the euthanasia available. But we don't have like a cultural way of going through this process. If we make this new thing available, we have to come up with rituals and customs and normal ways of doing it, so that it's not just this traumatic, surreal anomaly that we experience. You don't want, if you were having this done to yourself, you wouldn't want to do it in a way that leaves everybody just shook to the core and dreaming about it for the rest of their life and having nightmares and stuff. So we need some way that we as a society say that's how we should go about doing it. And what's strange about this situation is that we have so many social customs, I mean, hundreds of thousands of social customs that that we enact without even having to think about it because they're just so natural part of us. Shaking hands or saying goodbye or having a baby shower or whatever seems natural and normal. But those customs have, for the most part, arisen organically over time without anybody just like creating it out of nowhere and saying, this is how we're going to do this thing. I'm inventing a baby shower, we're all going to do it. To create a custom like that is like contrary to what customs really are. Customs are things that normally arise on their own out of a society practicing things over time, and then it sort of gets solidified into something that we say, oh, this is a wedding. This is what we call this thing. But you don't look back at our social customs and say, oh, well, the wedding was invented by John Turtledove in 1932 or whatever. Like, that would just be, it would make the custom seem just sort of forced and inauthentic, and I don't know what, there's a specific word I'm thinking of. It would make it seem, well, anyway, it would make it seem like a lot of things that you don't want the end of life to feel like. Contrived, that's the word I'm looking for. It would make it seem contrived if you just invented a custom and said, this is the custom. It'd be like inventing a catchphrase, Ugh. But that's the problem that faces us. If we start doing this brand new thing, and this thing is so significant, we have to have some sort of normal way or way of normalizing it at a social level, at a cultural level. We have to just create it. And so what should that be like, to say goodbye to a person when they're choosing to leave the world? Tell me your thoughts on that. Maybe it would be helpful to think of yourself as the person who's leaving. Or maybe it would be more helpful for you to think of somebody you love choosing this route and thinking of how you would want it to go if you were saying goodbye to somebody you loved. Think about it from both perspectives. What would you want as the person ending their life? And what would you want as the person who's there for someone they love who's ending their life, choosing to end their life? Who would you want present? Would it be a party? Would it be more like a religious ceremony? How do you integrate this with your religion if you have one? What do you do? So those are the practical problems, or just a few of the practical problems that aren't exactly deeply ethical problems, but there's a lot of practical problems that are like much more ethically challenging. So let's say that we've put aside the question of how we actually go about doing euthanasia, like what our ritual is and what our method is. And let's say we've decided on those things, and now we're facing the question of who will we help? Let's say it's going to be done by a hospital, seems like the way it would probably go at first, but maybe we have some new institution, some sort of euthanasia business that is part medical service because they administer a sort of medicalized way of dying, part also a party planning service or something that helps you go through the end of your life this way. I don't know. But let's say we're part of whatever organization or group that is going to be in charge of administering this treatment. And treatment is such a euphemism. Like all of these, this whole conversation is difficult because it gets sort of like covered in euphemisms, like a ship with barnacles on it. You have to like pull all these euphemisms off to see what the actual thing is. Is the process or the person's passing. No, this is death that we're talking about. This is killing a person. We think we think that it might be an ethical killing. It is killing a person, it's ending a person's life, or at least putting the tools in their hand to do it themselves, to kill themselves. So let's say we're part of this organization that's going to do that. Think about the questions that would be that you would have to wrestle with. You'd have to have not just wrestle with internally. You'd have to have some actual literal policy on, like, who will you give the treatment to? Any person that just walks in the door, certainly not. Right? You certainly don't want people who are just in a bout of depression to walk in the door and say, "I want to end my life," and you're just like, "Okay, that's what we do here. Come on back." You know, that's crazy. Any half intelligent, half morally concerned person would automatically know that we have to have some people that we turn away, and that there would be such people. So when should we give the okay? Let's say a person comes in. What would you want to see from them? Or what would you need to see in order to say, yes, I'm comfortable with this person, with administering euthanasia to this person, helping this person to euthanize themselves? Some of you are going to lean in a very sort of libertarian, liberal direction where it's like, look, it's up to the person. And if they really want to die, they should have that right. I mean, there's something compelling about that argument that your life is the one thing that is absolutely, truly yours in your hands. And telling a person they can't end their life is, in a way, depriving them of the most fundamental natural right that they have, is to choose what to do with their life. People on the other side would say, well, you're not actually telling a person they can't end their life, you're just telling them that you won't help them. That's true. But in a scenario where society has evolved in such a way that this is like a service that we provide to other people, that we think we owe other people, not to just let them in their life, but to help them do it in a dignified and reasonably painless way, you have to know who you're okay with doing it with. So saying it's just up to the person raises all sorts of possible scenarios that I bet, if you think about them, you won't be okay with. So for instance, a person comes in and they tell you they don't have any terminal illness, but they've been chronically depressed for the last 8 years and none of the medications help, so they want to be euthanized. Maybe you'd say it's possible that that person could be a good candidate, but maybe you'd want to know more. Like, what if the person, as you learn about their life, it turns out that they were part or are part of a just totally toxic family life? And you think, if you could get away from this, maybe you've never considered really getting away from this, but if you could get away from this, you could have a life that would be way less depressing and awful than you currently do. Would you then be okay if you felt like there was some path that the person could take to feeling better about their life? If you could get them instead to a place where they would want to keep on living, would you feel like that was your moral duty? Or would you feel like it would be fine to just help a person die whenever they felt like it for their own reasons? Some people are going to feel like, well, who am I to scrutinize another person's reasons for deciding to end their life? Well, you should scrutinize it if the question is, are you going to be complicit in it, right? This is a joint venture now. And maybe you'd say, well, I'm never going to be complicit in this. I'm never going to be like working at a euthanasia provider. But the question is, what should the people who are in those positions be doing? What sort of vetting and questions should they be asking? And I want to hear this from you. What standards would you want the person to meet in order for you to say, yeah, this is good? Do they have to be terminally ill? How far away from death do they need to be? Does death need to be like certain, or what if there's possibility that some treatment could make them okay? What if you find out that they do have a gigantic life insurance policy that's going to go to their kids, and that their kids are encouraging this choice? No, don't think immediately that the idea that the family would be encouraging is a bad thing. I mean, you would want your family to be on board with this and to think that the decision you're making is okay and we're behind you. But what if you thought that there might be ulterior motives on the family's part? What would you need to know or see in order to be okay and to think that you were doing a morally right thing by helping this person in their life? Is just depression enough? Just chronic, lifelong depression? Some people have that. What if the family's not supportive at all of it? I mean, if you help this person, they're going to be gone. The family's going to have to live the rest of their life with the loss. So maybe you owe something to the family too in the way you make this decision. And what about this? The one that disturbs me the most when I think about it is the question about people who are mentally impaired, people who have not like dementia necessarily, but imagine people who are intellectually impaired, mentally retarded people who have enough cognitive ability to communicate and to think and make some choices on their own, but who we don't think has nearly as much as normal people do, and that keeps them from being able to make some decisions in their life responsibly because they just can't understand the nature of the decision, like asking them whether they want to itemize the deductions on their tax forms or if they want to go with the standard deduction. Like, we don't think that person actually can make that decision competently because they simply can't understand the concepts involved. But what about death? Is a person incompetent or incapable of making the decision about the end of their life simply because they have a much lower IQ than normal? Most of the people who are on the side of euthanasia being available think that we should make it available because it's like a basic human right to be able to choose when to die. And that we owe it to, as a society, we owe it to the people to not force them to do it in horrific ways like blowing their brains out or whatever, but to make avenues available for it to be peaceful. But if it's a basic human right, if that's the groundwork for your being approving of euthanasia, then it's a basic human right for people with really low IQs too. I mean, being intellectually impaired doesn't make you less of a human. And so if they're basic human rights, they have it too. And I worry that in making euthanasia available, those people are going to be totally sidelined, and nobody will take seriously their desires. But you also don't want to just hear a person say, I wish I wasn't living. And say, okay, well, we can take you to the place. So how do you have that conversation and get whatever you need out of that person to say yes or no? It, in one sense, be the same conversation you're having with any person, because hopefully your standards should be the same of whether you think that life is okay to help end, but the conversation would have to be very different. You'd have to ask different sorts of questions to get at their motives, because maybe they can't just express it to you directly. So how do we make this available to everybody, to non-communicative people? For instance, people in comas who can communicate, by just wiggling a finger or something. So that's what I want you to journal about. I want you to tell me what standards you think there should be. Imagine you're working at a place, you're the policy director or on the policy team for a hospital that's going to start offering this service, and you have to come up with a policy. What is your policy? What list of requirements are there that a person has to meet in order for you to think that you are doing the right thing morally and helping them in their life? You don't have to tell me what method you would use. You don't have to tell me what the ritual would be like. Though I also want to hear that if you have thoughts on it, how the ritual would go. So let's say it this way. You can do one of two journals. You can either talk to me about the policies that you should have in order to give a yes or no, or you can talk about the way that you want to see it ritualized or turned into a cultural event surrounding the end of this person's life. What should that be like, and how do we make it humane and as good as possible? So pick one of those two, only one of those two, and write a journal entry about it. And that's your assignment for the week. You should have done a journal for Tuesday, but just do it on the readings that you had. And then today, just do this one, and we're good for the week. I'm not going to put out another second lecture for Tuesday. Just the readings will suffice. And I'll see you on Monday, or Tuesday next week. Last things, any housekeeping? I don't think so. I haven't yet finished updating the grade sheet to reflect that I've seen everybody's journals. I've gotten about half of them done, but you can be on the lookout for that by the end of the weekend, I think. Sorry for being slow on that. It's been a very unusual week. So thanks for watching. Thanks for being in the class. I wish I could be saying it in person, but I hope you have a good weekend.